Hello, I'm Karl Stabe, and today I have Paul Young of the Pragmatic Institute. He's an instructor and coach. Thank you for being here.
Thank you. Appreciate it, Carl. Looking forward to it.
Yes, we met a couple weeks ago in Austin, Texas, and it was all around being, around program, around being a product manager, and how do you really grasp that from a business perspective because as a coach, somebody that you coach, how do you start to grasp how all these systems connect together, and then which ones do you start to improve on?
Sure. Sure. Great question. Maybe just a little bit about my background to give context to the discussion. I've built a career in the product space, product management, product marketing, in companies of all different shapes and sizes, from Fortune 50 down to startups. And through that, as I've grown to my career, I've gotten to the executive level. I've, led teams of all different sizes. And nowadays, like you said, I do coaching, consulting, instruction, with Pragmatic. And so I get to work with, at this point, tens of thousands of students on these concepts. And one of the big things, there's so many books you can read, right? There's so many podcasts you can listen to. I think you told me you're up to episode 275 or something on this podcast, which is amazing. I think it's wonderful content. But it can also be a lot, right? It's overwhelming. There's just so much out there. How do you pick? Um, I think leadership is one of those topics that's like that because if I go and ask 10 people to define leadership, I think I get 10 different answers. And so I like to maybe break down leadership into some core elements that you can understand and then work on. And then you can build your system around those. And the way that I typically think about it with the people that I coach is to break leadership down into seven ideas. Think of these as like the core tenets or aspects of what makes an effective leader. Another way I describe it is like different ingredients in a cocktail, and we can all mix these differently. Like you're going to have a different mix than I'm going to have, and that's okay and natural. But here's the seven. The first is strategic clarity. So a good leader provides, really good strategy on what we're doing and not doing. The second is emotional intelligence, right? Being able to regulate your own emotions and recognize it in others. The third is obviously communication and influence, especially if you're in a role like product management leader, but even in other roles as well, you have to be able to effectively communicate your ideas. The fourth is execution. Great leaders get things done. They find a way. The fifth is adaptability, and that means being able to deal with change, especially important right now with AI. The sixth is people empowerment. All right, great leaders are about raising up those around them. They're not just about climbing the ladder themselves. And then the seventh is what I call authentic presence, which basically means being real. It's being yourself and bringing your true self to the equation. And if you can mix those ingredients correctly, then you'll find and be able to unlock some of your superpowers as a leader to be able to really get where you're going.
I love that. So, do you have maybe a story around somebody that you've seen grow, kind of lean into one of those areas? Because I find, being yourself, it's such a large concept. Like there's so many different facets to us. How do you embrace some of that and maybe let go of some of the other stuff? Where do
Sure.
you put that attention?
So maybe authentic presence is a good one to dig into, like being your true self. But these are all interconnected, right? You can't talk about one without the other. But yeah, really, really cool example comes to mind from earlier in my career. I worked for a company that was acquired by Cisco Systems, the networking company, and this company that was the acquisition provided services, basically outsourced management of network devices. So if you don't want to manage your own routers and switches and firewalls, you could call us and we would do it for you over the internet. And there was a big event that happened that week on the internet. Like, do you remember the big, I think it was Cloudflare hack that happened last year, like shut down? It was like that. It was that kind of
Yep.
scale.
Yep.
And of course,
CrowdStrike, right? Was that
CrowdStrike,
the?
that was it. CrowdStrike,
Yeah.
thank you.
Uh-huh.
Um, and our customers rightly are freaking out because, this is going to affect them, their network infrastructure, their business, their results. And at that moment, alarm bells are going off inside the building. All the operational screens on the walls are lighting up with red. And the executive team gets everybody together crowded into a conference room to basically say, like, what do we need to do here to protect our clients? And in that moment, everybody turned to this one guy in the room, and his name was Rush. And I remember Rush because he was in the organizational hierarchy, the management sort of structure of the organization. If you were to draw a pyramid from the CEO down, he was kind of in the lower layers, right? He was an individual contributor. But when it came to network security, he was the expert.
Hmm.
And in that moment, all the executive team looked at him and said, Rush, what do we need to do in this situation in order to overcome this crisis? And he said, well, it's pretty simple. We need to do this, and this, and this. And like everybody jumped from that point to execute his plan. Now, in that moment, in terms of the management hierarchy, the pyramid of the organization, he was still at the bottom, but he was acting as a leader through the organization, and even people above him in the organizational hierarchy were following his lead. And so I think that's a good example of like being true to yourself. You're not getting intimidated, you're reading the room with emotional intelligence. It's all those seven aspects that I just talked about.
Did he ask for a raise after that meeting?
He certainly should have. No,
Right?
he was very successful in his career. I'm still connected with him on LinkedIn. I need to check in and see how he's doing.
That's cool. Yeah, I think too often, yeah, we not that we dismiss people that maybe aren't upper in the hierarchy, but we don't. Good leaders will ask. They'll stop and they have a good idea of who they need to ask and who can help,
Yeah,
because we can't do it all as leaders. It's impossible, and we need to lean on other people. But the great leaders, kind of say, hey, what do we do here? And it might be a group of people or it might be one individual, but I love that story. And I think it's a good segue to storytelling. You have a background in film, and you use story systems to align your team, right? Or how do you use story systems to align your team? Because to get people to understand and row in the right direction, sometimes it feels like you're herding cats, but a good story, a good vision will really help drive people going in the right direction.
totally. I couldn't agree more. So this one ties back to the communication and influence vector that I talked about at the top, one of our seven. And storytelling is incredibly important. And I think it's undersold by a lot of people. They're like, yeah, yeah, stories, whatever. Let's focus on the data, spreadsheets, right? That's what matters, the numbers. But I always like to ask people, everyone can remember a time. Like you can probably remember a time, Carl, when you were sent a spreadsheet that somebody else built.
Mm.
And you had to spend 30 minutes, 45 minutes digging through every cell, understanding how the formulas and tabs connected to one another. If I got back to you after you spent an hour decoding that spreadsheet and asked you 6 weeks later, what did you learn from that? Like, good luck, because we're humans, not computers. Humans are hardwired to relate to stories better than we relate to hard data.
Mhm.
It, Conversely, if I were to sit down with you and say, Carl, we just did a dozen customer visits with our top clients, and what we found was one problem that connected all of them. And if we're able to solve that one problem, it will make them customers for life. That kind of story goes viral within the organization. People remember it, it resonates with them, it drives them to action. And so, like, stories are really, really important to provide that almost connective tissue to the layer of action that happens below it and the influence that comes along with it. So, I'm a huge fan of the storytelling aspect of the job.
And I'm just curious, from your background, what constitutes a good story in business, right? Like it is so different from watching a movie or reading a book. But how do we do that from a business perspective that doesn't bore people, that grabs their attention
Yep.
and gets them to share it, right? Because that's the key part. It's like you tell the guy in the cubicle next to you or on Zoom, and then that's how it dominoes.
Yeah. Yeah. So I'll give you a couple of you and your audience a couple of tricks that I've learned as a professional instructor, public speaker. I do this for a living every single week. And so these are things that are sort of like readily apparent to me after, 16 years of doing this week in and week out. But maybe a little bit new ideas for people that aren't doing it or stepping into it for the first time. Because everyone seems to be intimidated by public speaking. And story,
Hmm.
if you're storytelling, by definition, you're public speaking, whether it's to one person or to a room of 50.
Hmm.
Um, the first advice is keep it real. And so like stories should be grounded in reality. Um, Examples work best. And they need to be short but memorable. I always like to tell the people I coach what we're going for are anecdotes, not stem winders. And so if it's more than like, I don't know, 30 to 60 seconds, it's probably too long. It's got to be enough to capture their attention and be memorable, but really drive home the point that we're trying to get them to learn. And what I do, for example, when I start one of my training classes at Pragmatic, we have this technique. I'll give you a little peek behind the curtain here at Pragmatic. You're familiar with the James Bond movies?
Yep.
All right. So whether you're familiar with them or not, any Mission Impossible, James Bond, like all these types of movies, they always start out the same way. In the first 3 to 5 minutes of the movie, you've got the hero, Bond or whoever, in some sort of action sequence, right? They're running from the bad guys or they're chasing somebody, they're getting shot at, they're riding motorcycles or jet skis or, you know, whatever. They're going down the mountain and it's absolute chaos. But that Bond moment exists for a reason, and it's to immediately grab and capture your attention and get you engaged at the very beginning of the movie. Because once they capture you and they've got a hold of you, then they can take you where they want you to go. So whenever I open so like most trainings you would go to, start off like this. Hi, I'm Paul Young with Pragmatic Institute. Let me tell you a little bit about my background. I spent how many years in industry and blah, blah, blah. Let me tell you, it's all about me. No, we're not going to do that. So instead, what we do is we start with a bond moment. Before any bios, before any intros, we start off with a small story, usually about 3 minutes or less, that reinforces the point of what it is they're about to learn.
Mhm.
And I'm not saying you need to open up every presentation like that, but starting off with a small example that is illustrative of either the problem we're trying to solve or the challenge we're trying to overcome can go a long way to setting the stage towards getting to a resolution. It's the soft skill of influence that we're exercising there.
Oh, that's people. This is why I have interviews like this. It's these subtle little systems that pe we don't think about. Like you said, it's this understated part of being a leader and being an influencer. Like you said, like this guy that was sitting in the boardroom and everybody turned to him and he basically is like, "We need to do these things." And everybody understood. They knew him. They understood. He knew what he could do and what mattered, and they trusted that. And that's what I think stories do well is they build that trust and eventually help you earn it.
That's right. So build your bond moment. Think about what your bond moment is going to be for your next, meeting.
And even me, right? Like and I'm critiquing myself here, but starting this interview, how cool would it be to let the person know, because we're usually talking before we hit record. Hey, what's your bond moment? I want something that grabs something. And I'm like, I don't do that, right? And I'm just asking these questions and I have them planned out, but sometimes I'm like, oh, this would be a cool way to start. But it's off the fly of my brain and all of a sudden I'm like, no, that's not what I intended. But if I had this structure of setting up this bond moment, that could be a powerful way to start the
Well,
podcast.
if I could, Carl, let me give you like I do a lot of presentations on leadership and so on.
Hmm.
Let me give you the bond moment that I use when I start one of my leadership presentations
Okay, let's do it.
and see if it resonates. So I'd like to tell you about somebody that I met in my career for purposes of today's talk, we'll change the names to protect the innocent. His name is Chris, or that's the name we're going to go with here. And Chris was in a product management role, and he always seemed to get stuck on what you might call the loser projects. You know, things that had a high amount of tech debt, projects that were at the end of their life cycle, and so on. And he never seemed like he could get moved forward. And he was really frustrated. And he eventually felt like he was going to have to exit his career in product management and find something else to do. Now, I also want you to contrast that with a different person I met at the same time in my career. His name was Will. Will always seemed to get onto the projects that were skyrocketing in growth. They had high levels of executive visibility, and he advanced quickly up his career ladder and eventually got a C-level role at multiple companies. He was referred to by many inside the organization as a quote unquote high potential employee. What is it that separates Chris from Will? The difference is in how effectively they communicate and are able to exercise their leadership and soft skills within the organization. And that's exactly what we're going to learn in today's podcast, how to build systems that will help you get to where you want to be.
Mm. Okay. I got my little clip I have to put at the front of this. I love it. Yes. Because it's painting this picture and you're doing it through people, right? And this is how we tell stories. We want to know about what other people did so we can apply those same things in our career, in our business, whatever. I love that. Yes. Okay. I need to get better at this. And this is why I do this to improve, right? To be a better leader, a better podcaster.
I love it.
Okay. So, one of the things I think that's really important, you talk about, people act exactly as we incentivize them to act. When do you see a team's system breaking down? And then what is the final incentive lever or the first incentive lever that you try to implement to help?
Specifically with regard to leadership.
Yes.
Okay, that's a good question. So I like to think of the pyramid analogy for an organization may be useful in some circumstances. Like when we think about leaders, they can come from anywhere in that pyramid. They don't have to just be at the top of the managerial hierarchy. But when it comes to setting strategy, direction, and goals, the pyramid analogy is pretty good. Because what it shows us is that somebody sets the strategy and direction for the organization at the top, and then that filters down through layers of the organization until it gets to wherever you are. And I want to set goals and alignments that for my team are connected back to, the team, the business unit, the product portfolio, eventually the company. There's got to be that laddering effect between all of them. If I'm trying to set goals for my team that aren't connected to where we're going as an organization, then that creates friction across the teams where they feel like there's disconnection in their goals and as a result, their motivations. So the first thing I'm going to be looking for is, are the teams aligned going up that pyramid? And if not, that's something that we need to address at a higher level of the organization. Um, Specifically towards goals and objectives to help people become better leaders, one of the things that I'm going to probably look for within my teams most of the time is to get a better understanding of where they are today in their strengths and weaknesses and then help them improve it. I'm a big fan of building what I call leadership personas.
Mm.
And I mentioned those seven elements of leadership, those ingredients in the cocktail that we studied at the top of the podcast. You can take those seven ingredients and determine what is the mix that you have to paint a picture using like a spider diagram or a radar chart of what does your leadership profile look like. Maybe you're really good on strategic clarity, but your people empowerment needs work. Or maybe you're really, really good at being an executor, but you need help on the strategy. This is going to help me help you, both in a leadership and a managerial sense, about how to improve your skill sets and your systems to improve. And we're going to put you into a couple of different buckets. In the system that I teach, there are 5 or 6 different leadership personas that you could potentially fall into. And nobody falls into one of these perfectly cleanly. But just to give you an idea, the names that I put on these are names like there's the empathetic coach, is one of them. The grounded operator is another. The visionary architect is a third. The adaptive catalyst and the charismatic driver are others. And so each one of those is going to have a different mix of those seven ingredients we talked about. But I'm going to align how I work with them, how I help them think about their own personal leadership style, and then eventually how I measure them against that so I can help them shore up their weaknesses, but also improve their strengths.
Mm, I love that. Yeah, because you have to give something to anchor to, and it helps because you're right. We all have different facets of a personality, but we usually lean in a certain area, and we have to start there and understand how to use that to our benefit and as well as the people that we lead.
Couldn't agree more. Like for me, when I think about the seven ingredients in my leadership cocktail, communication is an influence is a strength for me. I'm a public speaker. I do it all the time, so it should be. Strategic clarity, I'm really good at. I'm a strong strategic thinker, and I'm really adaptable. Areas that I have to work harder on are things like people empowerment, emotional intelligence, and so on. That doesn't mean I can't do them. It just means I have to put more energy. I've got to burn more calories in those areas to
Mhm.
get into where I want to be. And so I think if you first start with an assessment, a clear-eyed assessment of where you are, then you can build a system to help address whatever your needs are and build from there. It's when we just take this shotgun approach of trying to do it all, you end up with a strategy that is very spread. I call it peanut butter strategy, where you're spreading yourself too thin. And nobody is successful like that. You got to focus.
Yeah. Yes. Okay. So I know AI is a big part of how you help people. You've written about using AI to analyze large volumes of market data. So I'm just curious, what is one specific AI-driven workflow you've implemented, and how has it fundamentally changed how your team understands the voice of the market? Because I think AI is going to take up more and more space and use in our, especially in the product driven world. So we have to be able to understand how to navigate it, but then also help others use it as well.
Love the question. And just out of curiosity, Carl, what's typically your lag between us recording this and this hitting the internet?
Usually about 4 to 5 weeks.
Okay, so this answer will be completely out of date by the time people are listening to this. With regard to AI. But okay, so what are things that we're doing to at Pragmatic Institute to help people learn and implement and use AI? Our focus is primarily at Pragmatic on what I would call the extended product team. So we work a lot with product managers, product marketers, marketing professionals, and so on. Doing things like, like as you said, market analysis, building a business case, and so on. A big focus that we're starting to see teams get into nowadays is more of the agentic approach, as is probably no surprise to you. How can we build skills using something like Claude Cowork to create agents that can actually go out and replicate part of your work and in more of a routinized way. Competitive analysis is a great example of that I think is ripe for some of that automation. You can build an agent that will automatically go out and gather information on your top however many competitors, summarize the relevant pieces for you, look at things as they're changing, and then feed that data into the next agent that's going to do something with it, like update your business case, and then maybe your roadmap or the stories that you're working on in Jira or whatever. And so that's one area we're seeing a lot of impact with AI today.
Mm.
Uh,
Okay, so what is it that you can, and I want to break this down a little bit more around a workflow because this is what's, most of the people that are listening are leaders. So they've worked and built up these neural connections without AI. And now it's like, hey, you need to change up your whole workflow and you need to help your people change up their workflow. So can you give us an example of like, okay, this is something that's worked well. Try this. Because I think giving them almost like a little story that they can say, oh, yeah, I can do that.
yeah. So here's the way I think about it. One of my favorite quotes is that, if you're in product management, for example, I don't believe product managers are going to get replaced by AI, but a product manager who's using AI well will replace one that isn't. It's going to be a value add to the work because in a world that where the cost of producing content like a business case or a roadmap is rapidly approaching zero, what really matters is judgment more than the content you're building. And
Mm,
so what we need is to do as leaders is to be able to teach people how to not just hit the easy button and get an output that is 25 pages long for a PRD in ChatGPT or Claude Cowork, but rather to look at it with a critical eye and knowledge of the market to know if that thing that it was produced was any good.
mm.
And this is especially, I think, a prescient challenge in the prototyping world today. Let me give you an example, Claude, Carl, of the what I call the a good pattern and an anti pattern.
Yes,
Um,
that sounds good.
so like a good pattern. So a good pattern of using a tool like Lovable, Replit, Factory AI, and so on, these like rapid prototyping, is to use it as a way to quickly test and iterate on ideas in the market to illustrate the problem that we're trying to solve and get quick market feedback on it. Right? That's a good pattern because that is the product manager, for example, working with a designer, or not, but like we're using it as a method to learn. Right? That's a good way to use AI in that workflow. The anti pattern is when a leader, typically an executive with authority, says, wow, product managers can now hit an easy button in Lovable and produce a output that looks really good in 5 seconds as a prototype and then deliver it over to development to get built or even hit another button and get it built to something semi-workable on their own. That's bad for a lot of reasons. But the main reasons are product managers are not trained product designers. So when we talked about the cost of building something is approaching zero, but they don't have the judgment, they don't know whether or not the thing that they produced using the rapid prototyping tool is any good.
Mm,
Most of them. And so you're getting better at producing slop faster. And certainly the level of that will rise over time. But I need the judgment of somebody who's made it their job, their career, their learning to be able to look at an output from AI and say, is that good or are we just producing bad faster? And so leaders need to be able to enable structures and systems that reward judgment and quality, not just speed. And we need to be able to optimize and balance the trade-offs between all three. One of the clients I'm working with right now came to me in a session that I was doing recently, and they said, "Hey, Paul, I've got 8 designers. How many of them can I let go now that I can do this?" And we had a version of the discussion that we just had to say, like, look, can you become more efficient using AI? The answer is yes. Do you want to completely discard a skill set out of your organization that is really important to your market and what they care about? I would advise no. And ultimately, they did decide to retain a good portion of that team for the precise reason of they had the judgment to look at the output of AI to say, was it appropriate?
mm. Yes, I love that. And I think too often we try these different things and we think, oh yeah, this is going to solve all these issues. But to your point, like we need people, and just like I think certain product managers, maybe there will be if they use AI, they can handle more. So you won't need as many product managers, but the ones that are good at their job will be amazing and be able to handle lots of different products and different flows. And same thing with designers, right? So you're more effective and you're more efficient. But to your point, that means we have to skill up. We've got to be able to use these tools, understand how they work, how they fit into our workflow. And to me, that is just saying, hey, this is a warning shot to everybody listening right now, even leaders. How are you integrating AI? How are you doing it to, so you can make those judgment calls. So you can say, yeah, we might not need eight designers, but let's keep four because now we can spread this work across AI and designers, but we're meshing this together and we're getting better output on the back end.
Well, let's maybe wrap that part of the discussion by saying right now we're seeing this interesting convergence in the product world between product manager, designer, and engineer. right? Which normally I would call the product triad, right? The 3 points on the triangle that have to work together to make a good product. Now with
Hmm.
AI, it's kind of collapsing all that. You've got product managers saying, I can do designs using Lovable or Replit, and I can do coding using Claude Cowork, give it all to me. And I've got designers who are saying, I can do business analysis using AI, and I can do coding. And I've got engineers who are saying, I can do both of those other things too. And so it's like this singularity, this black hole that's pulling them all together into one space.
Hmm.
But when you think about that triumvirate, that triangle that has to work together, there is a natural creative tension that needs to and should exist between the 3 points on the triangle, the developer, the designer, and the product manager. The product manager representing the voice of the market, the designer representing what's the best solution for the market to solve that problem, and then the engineer representing the technical constraints and the costs to get there. When I collapse that into a single person using AI, all of those natural tensions get wiped away. And we end up with worse outputs rather than better. We just end up with them faster. And so this is an encouragement I have for leaders is to really think about like before we have this rush to replacement using AI, let's just sit back and think critically about some of the natural creative tensions that exist in those different roles today and which ones we want to retain as we go into this, brave new world.
Yeah. Yeah. And this is it has to be a fluid process. It can't just be like, yep, this is the way we're going. Because to your point, AI changes fast and it's learning quickly. And you might be able to, have a designer do this, all those things that, you said from market research to analysis to design. But then, maybe a skill set from the product manager might fit well with this project. Or, like I've talked to a lot of clients, they don't want to cut back staff because they've found all the people that they have are very valuable, but they want to grow. And if you use AI, you can grow faster because now these people have this PhD level assistant supporting them in finding doing this research, looking at these reports, and you're able to move faster. So therefore, you're able to grow faster. But there is no perfect fit or system for anybody.
That's right.
So I'm curious if we shift a little bit back to you, because I think too often we often think of systems, especially from a product perspective, of like, oh, how well can we do this, and how can we deliver this, and how can we design that, and what is the customer saying? But then from a personal standpoint, if we are, especially if we're using AI and we're moving faster, we're gonna have more chances of burnout, more chances of overwhelm. So, you talk about X factors in your work, and speaking truth to power. How do you personally audit your own leadership performance against these traits? And do you have like a personal system or process that you have for self-reflection?
Yeah, great. I love that question. So the burnout thing is more real than ever nowadays because like AI has put rocket fuel on everybody, and now we're just moving so fast. The people that I work with, the clients that I work with, week in and week out, are telling me that they are packed from the moment they start their day until they sign off with meetings, back to back. And then whenever they're not in meetings, they're in their AI tool doing stuff. And I ask them, okay, well, when does the work actually get done? And apparently that's after hours for many of them. And so, it's very common for, based on the research that Pragmatic Institute does, for a product manager, for example, to have, 80 plus hours of meetings in a month, which is like more than 2 full-time weeks of just meetings. That's just meetings. That's nothing else. So like
Yeah.
half your month or more going to meetings. Like what else are we doing here? Um, the system that I use for myself is, and that I encourage my teams to think about, uh, one key element of it is you have to be able to take that breath, and so you have to be able to turn off. But maybe more importantly, you have to have that contact, human contact with your market, the people you serve, right? We have to see them face to face. We have to understand their problems so that we can bring that understanding of the problems into all the work we do. It's critical, it's critical context that everybody in that type of role needs. And I would argue anybody in a leadership role really needs. Because if you don't understand the problem you're solving, then you know who else doesn't understand? Everybody else you're working with, and also the
Hmm.
AI that you're trying to inform. And so having that crystal clear understanding from the voice of the market to inform your work is one of the key metrics that I put on my product managers when I was managing teams, to really use that to inform the way that they led within organizations. There's a lot of ways to do that, but one way that I would do it is I would give my teams a quota on the number of market visits that I expected them to execute each quarter. And if you were on my team, you had a quota of 10 market visits per quarter per product manager, which is about one per week. And we could quibble over the number, but my question to them is if you're not talking to your market at least weekly, what are we using to drive our decision making? How are we leading in the organization without that? And so that's a key element. And then the other, to go back to our previous conversation, is to gain that understanding of your mix of leadership traits so that you can direct uh, appropriately where you're focusing. And I actually have a little website with a quiz that people can take to get that assessment for themselves.
And what, let's just share that because we're about to kind of wrap up here. So, where can they go to take that assessment?
Yeah, so the assessment is called Leading from Where You Are. And if you go to LFWYA, leadingfromwhereyouare.com. Then you will find a link to the quiz. You can take it, it's free. And it will spit out that radar chart, that spider chart for you and your personal leadership style. It'll give you your leadership persona. So you can see where your strengths and weaknesses are. You just have to be honest with the assessment. Probably takes about, I don't know, 15 minutes to fill out. It's about 80 questions. And it will give you that picture of your strengths, where you need to work, and where you need to go from there. Just use it as a directional tool that will inform your leadership style.
I love that. That sounds like a great tool. Thank you.
You're welcome.
So, where can people go to find out more about you?
Well, you can go to the company that I work for, Pragmatic Institute. So, Pragmatic Institute does product training for product managers, product marketers, people in that kind of world. And you can read my bio there. You can sign up for one of our classes. Definitely encourage people to check that out. And also on my LinkedIn.
Cool. Thank you so much.
You're welcome. Appreciate it.